A thread by Soul War. More Trump victories the mainstream media will never cover honestly. The defeats of ISIS and Iran. Yesterday, a historic, game-changing agreement between the United Arab Emirates and Israel was announced as most US-based news outlets made it sound like President Trump was just a bystander. This agreement did not happen overnight. It took years to manage it, and I assure you the Trump administration was an integral part of it. This open understanding between the UAE and Israel is simply acknowledging a new reality taking hold among the Arab states, that the generational enmity practiced towards Israel was irrational and pointless to continue along that course. War for war's sake, as grievances fester and opportunities for dialogue and potential peace are passed by decade after decade. The majority of Arab populations are now under 30 years of age. It's clear the historic differences are a harder sell with every passing decade to youths who now see far more in common with Israel than anything objectionable. To them, the justifications to perpetuate the conflict sound hollow and contrived. Well, there's a big reason for that. Remember these guys? The depredations, butchery, and savagery of ISIS are still an open wound to the Islamic world. I need to be very clear here. There is a distinct difference between being a Muslim and being an Islamist, supremacist. Muslims were horrified by ISIS's claims and actions. Before people at me about how Islam's history shows X, Y, and Z, allow me to say I already know that. I'm writing this thread about today and tomorrow, not yesterday. Festering grievances and all that, A large percentage of Arabs from 2001 to 2013 supported Al-Qaeda. What changed that? ISIS. The ultimate proof that the Arab states had their own gutful of ISIS is that by 2015, Arab coalition forces had formed to combat and defeat the savages. The US military supported the Arabs with air power and advisors, but the Arabs did the fighting on the ground, defeating ISIS. I have an extensive picture gallery of what ISIS did to people. I won't post them because that savagery doesn't need to be seen anymore. Muslims defeated the Islamist caliphate because for every non-Muslim ISIS murdered, they slaughtered 19 Muslims. It was a bloodbath. I admit that after following the War on Terror, stupid name, since 9/11, I watched with a growing sense of horror as Obama snatched defeat from the jaws of victory by deliberately dropping the status of forces agreement with Iraq. This forced the Iraqi government to turn to Iran. If we had stayed the course for just 5 to 8 more years, all the sacrifices, including the lives of our soldiers, would have stabilized the region. Obama made sure that that would not happen. The Shia government in Iraq then turned to the Shia government in Iran, which infuriated me. Because I knew what most Americans did not, that Iran had been taking an active role in the insurgency in Iraq and that they were directly responsible for killing 600 plus US servicemen and women. This is the first time I heard the name Qasem Soleimani, the brutal head of the Quds Force. There were hearings before Congress about Iran's role in inflicting US casualties in Iraq. The United States mainstream media barely mentioned them. As I've said, if they don't cover it, it never happened. Or what's worse, they do cover it, but frame it dishonestly, thereby nullifying its impact. Obama, at that time, was sending pallets of cash to the mullahs and working feverishly to turn them into a nuclear power, to nuke Israel, I'm assuming. Into this hell zone of chaos and uncertainty came the rise of ISIS. My horror descended into despair as their foothold grew. The Iraqi military collapsed in the face of an ISIS force they outnumbered 20 to 1. ISIS commandeered all the abandoned weapons and vehicles, including main battle tanks. A significant number of their officers were former Iraqi army officers purged by the Iraq government for being Sunni. I stopped covering or watching it. I just couldn't. ISIS was soon worldwide, drawing what I call gore crow converts, like this kid who was from Australia who volunteered to become a truck bomb VBIED suicide bomber. This madness grew as attacks spread. The mainstream media covering every gruesome detail. Bataclan, savagery like you can't imagine. The French government actually covered up what ISIS did to those kids. Bodies were not released to families due to the fact that it would prove French authorities were so slow responding, ISIS had time to extensively torture the dying. Nice, France, 86 innocent souls crushed in an act of unbridled barbarity. I could go on and on and on. From its rise in 2003, created in 1999, but not a player until the US invasion of Iraq, until the toppling of its caliphate, ISIS exacted an incredible toll upon humanity. But 2017 would be ISIS's high water mark in its ability to conquer territory and savage the people of the Middle East. Because this happened. Try, if you can, to picture the state of ISIS in November of 2016. Now, imagine it's the year 2020 of a Hillary presidency. I'm sorry for doing that to you, but it had to be done. President Trump knew the Arab states were the solution to the rise of the Islamists. He knew the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, had military capabilities carefully prepared and hidden to deal with the growing Islamist threat. This is why Trump's first state visit was to the GCC's charter nation, Saudi Arabia. I still remember watching Trump and Melania descending from Air Force One as Fox News hosts stated they had no idea what this visit was for or supposed to accomplish. Everyone just assumed it was some big arms deal or something. The MSM, mainstream media, wandered about, clueless as history was being made. The kingdom's greeting of Trump's family was astounding. Veneration. As the kingdom heaped lavish devotion and praise upon President Trump, the mainstream media reported on the opulence of the surroundings and how Saudi men slobbered over Ivanka's long-legged blonde beauty. No one understood what was happening right in front of them. The seeds of ISIS's demise. Trump didn't pander to the Saudis like Obama did. Trump met them as equals and talked shop. Trump wanted to end the United States' endless wars since 9/11. Trump offered to help and support the GCC in its goal to put down once and for all the Islamist threats all civilized nations were suffering. Trump was fulfilling a promise he'd made himself on a street in Manhattan on September 12th, 2001. You see, Donald Trump lost a good number of friends and acquaintances the day before, and he swore if it was ever within his power, he would fix those responsible. Well, that's the Islamists, folks. This is President Trump's speech in Riyadh to the Gulf Cooperation Council and a world that was currently suffering from the scourge of Islamist terrorism. I ask you to take the time to listen to it when possible or read the transcript. The mainstream media, of course, ignored it. The context of what the GCC and Trump just accomplished flew right over their pointy little heads. After President Trump officially nailed the first nail into the Islamist coffin, he and the king did this. They opened the Global Center for Combating Extremism in Riyadh. Guess where the strategy and headquarters of the coming GCC campaign against ISIS was launched? Social media, having no idea that this was mocked, this historic moment with the picture on the right. Saruman, ha ha ha. Well, two can play at that game. I began to hope again. Trump's speech was clear. The US was getting out of the way to let the Arabs deal with an Arab problem. We would support them when needed, but in the coming 2 years, it would be Arab valor that defeated ISIS. And defeat them they did, handily. The Gulf Cooperation Council sent 250,000 Arab commandos into Iraq to defeat ISIS and recover Iraqi sovereignty from Iran. Iraq had accepted the help because of the GCC's offer being amazing. They would wear Iraqi uniforms and take orders from Iraqi officers. Lastly, they revealed what they could do with an amazing assortment of weaponry they had built up since around 2006. This, coupled with United States air support, among other things, was a powerful combination. The offensive was launched in October of 2016, and the Iraqis never lost a battle. ISIS's grip on Iraq was broken. They were driven back to Syria, and then on March 20th of 2019, Trump showed a map to an uncomprehending and sneering mainstream media telling them ISIS's caliphate would be completely gone by the next day. The mainstream media framed it as a boastful lie. It wasn't. ISIS is still a terror threat, but their dreams of caliphate are gone, at least until the next Democrat president. Iraq slowly regained its sovereignty from Iran as, during the same 3 years, President Trump neutered Iran's ability to project force. He did this by supporting Arab states suffering from Iran's proxy militias in their midst, by Trump and the GCC supporting those nations in key ways and hitting those militias hard as Iran's grip was weakened to such a degree it made the mullahs desperate. Iran has no real military. Their IRGC, Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, are poorly trained thugs who keep the Iranian people under their heel. Whenever they encounter trained soldiers in battle, they are slaughtered. The Quds force is no better. Since the mullahs could not allow Iraq to escape their grasp, they tasked Quds forces commander, Qasem Soleimani, remember him? To disrupt the peace in Iraq and force a divide between the Iraqis and Americans. Soleimani resolved to do this just as before, by murdering American military in terror attacks. There was just one problem. We'd learned our bloody lessons well. When 2 of Soleimani's proxy militias attacked the US embassy in Iraq, the Iraqis were slow to respond and perhaps in some cases deliberately late to the party. But the US Marines held the inner compound against a much larger force. As near as I can tell, not a single person died in the attack on the embassy. A lot of property damage and frayed nerves. Also, some militia leaders seem to be giving conflicting orders, from kill everyone to don't go in, we've sent our message. Weird. Well, old General Soleimani was apoplectic. Without dead Americans, his strategy to split the US Iraqi government wouldn't work. With the mullahs breathing down his neck for results, he resolved to go into Iraq personally to make sure this job got done right. Dead Americans on the way. I'd like to think that when that Hellfire missile hit that demonic shitbag, there was an angelic chorus of 600 plus American soldiers singing hallelujah. When Trump gave his speech that the world was leaving Islamism behind, he meant it. The GCC did their part, removing ISIS. And then President Trump punctuated the end of Iran's meddling openly in Iraq's governance by sending Soleimani to hell to keep al-Baghdadi company. The mullahs wept in impotent rage as I laughed. That's Brent right there. He's not a mullah. From a rising power about to achieve nukes to a shattered husk in 4 years. The mullahs and Hezbollah plotted and planned how to strike back, besides shooting down their own passenger airliners. They carefully and stealthily prepared for a savage sneak attack on X via a powerful stockpile of missiles. It would be devastating. Well, gosh. Stockpiling such a high number of missiles and powerful warheads in warehouses in Beirut may not have been the best idea. Iran's war against whomever just ended. The mullahs won't survive another Trump presidency. Good. One last note about the historic alliance between nations that ended ISIS's reign of terror and are currently ending the mullahs' reign as well. There's another partner besides the United States and the GCC. It's a partner the Saudis have had a mutual security and intelligence agreement with since 2006. Mutual security and intelligence agreement. Who could it be? Surprise! Peace is coming. Trump moves the United States Embassy to Jerusalem as doom criers predicted Armageddon. Looks like we skipped it. President Trump and his allies are reshaping the Middle East before our eyes. He's doing the impossible every day as people bitch and moan at him. The mainstream media may ignore this or frame it in the worst possible light, but none of that is going to matter. The Arab states, President Trump, and Israel are forging a new understanding that everyone can live with. Watch. United Arab Emirates was only the first to open relations. Now, they all will. Poor cash-strapped Iran. Just as I'm reading this happens. The U.S. seizes multi-million-dollar oil shipment bound for Venezuela. Those silly mullahs just can't catch a break, huh? By 2022, the Middle East will be a hotbed of peace. And you can quote me on that. To support Brent Cates' work, donate any amount here. PayPal.me/Brent Cates. Thank you for listening.